With the presidential elections going on in the United States, it's no wonder why voting is in a lot of people's mind. However, as probably most of us know, voting wasn't a right always available to everybody. That's why in today's video, we're going to take a look at the fascinating evolution of elections in history. But first, hi there, my name is Steffi and welcome to The Coffee Table, a place where we read books, talk about stuff, and if we're lucky, learn something. In today's video, we're going to take a look at the fascinating evolution of elections throughout history. Of course, I cannot talk about every type of election and every type of voting setting throughout all history, but I'm going to do my best to do an overall overview. That said, I also wrote an article. You can find the link down below where I listed all my sources that I used for this video. So let's get started. The beginnings of democracy. Ancient Greece. Some of the first recordings of political elections were found in ancient Greece around the 5th century. The ancient Athens had what is called a direct democracy, meaning they have one giant assembly which each person represented themselves, and they basically say yes or no just by raising their hands. In the direct democracy system, each citizen represented themselves, as opposed to have, for example, a party or another person representing their interests. In fact, the Greek word demokratia means people power. Sorry to everyone who's Greek who is watching my mispronunciation, by the way. However, the system was far from perfect as many people did not have the right to vote. Only male Athenians over 18 years old could exercise suffrage. That means that women, enslaved people, and people that were not from Athens did not have the right to express their opinions in the political assembly. Ancient Rome. Now we fast forward a couple of centuries to the Roman Republic around the 8th century. As opposed to the Greeks, ancient Romans implemented what is called a representative democracy. Instead of voting in one giant assembly like the Athens, the Romans had 3 assemblies instead, and the first one was called the Centuriate Assembly, and it was meant to elect the highest officers in Rome. Some people have called this system a quasi-democracy, as it represented first and foremost the interests of the wealthiest class and did not really represent the interests of the entire population. In this system, the wealthiest class were given priority to vote. So for example, when they were voting in the Centuriate Assembly, they will start with the richest people and go down to the working class. The problem is the vote stopped as soon as it reached 193 votes. That means that often the working class, since they were last to go, did not have the opportunity to exercise their right to suffrage. That said, the system of representative democracy, where officials elected represent the interests of the population, is still widely spread today in most democracies around the world. Other election systems around the ancient world. Mentioning the introduction, is really hard to capture all the election systems around the world. But there were some other examples aside the ancient Greeks and Romans. For example, we can see the elections of the Holy Pope in medieval times, as well as the elections of the king during the Pala period by feudal chiefs in medieval Bengal. The spread of democracy in modern Europe, the Magna Carta. After the fall of Rome, democratic ideals took a back seat for a couple of centuries, until in 1215, the Magna Carta was signed by King John in England. This was a critical moment for democracy because for the first time, the king was not above the law. King John signed this document because he had 40 rebellious barons rebelling against him and threatening with civil war. With the Magna Carta, they insisted, and I quote, they promised the protection of church rights, protection for the barons from illegal imprisonment, access to swift and impartial justice, a limitation of feudal payments to the crown. Again, the king consented because he wanted to prevent civil war. This was a pivotal moment because it set the stage for parliamentary rule as opposed to monarchy rule, and the idea that the people should have a say in their government. Modern democracies and revolutions. We move a little bit forward to the 17th and 18th century, where thinkers like John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, excuse my French accent, started writing about personal rights and freedoms. These ideologies became increasingly popular, so much so that inspired revolutions such as the American Revolution in 1775, of course, inspired by the famous incident, the Boston Tea Party in 1773, the French Revolution in 1789, and others. These populations looked to separate themselves from the influence of the crown and give their rights back to the people, or at least some of the people. Democratic ideas kept expanding. The 19th century represented a time of gradual but significant change in voting rights. At first, this right was still reserved for the wealthy class. However, movements in UK like Chartism seek to expand this right to all male population. Meanwhile, in the United States, property requirements for voting were eliminated in the early 1800s, opening voting rights to more white men. But voting was still far from universal. The women's suffrage movement. Activists like Susan B. Anthony from the United States and Emily Pankhurst from the UK fought tirelessly for women's voting rights, inspiring generations to come with their perseverance and determination. After decades of protests, hunger strikes, and other forms of legal battles, women finally gained the right to vote in the United States in 1920 with the pass of the 19th Amendment. In Europe, women's suffrage began locally in local government in 1962 in Sweden, where voting rights were given to spinsters and non-married women, but curiously not to married women. In the UK, women gained the right to vote in 1918 and 1928 in federal elections. Ecuador, on the other hand, became the first Latin American country to allow women to vote in federal elections in 1929. And as for Southeast Asia, women have been able to vote as early as 1897. As for Africa, before the influence of imperialist nations, women actually held positions of power. However, unfortunately, this changed as European nations gained more control on the African continent. To quote, "Men were given the power to act politically through indirect rule. In some parts of the continent, black women, therefore, did not achieve full suffrage until the end of the apartheid in 1994. That's actually super scary to read. The civil rights era and the voting rights expansion. In the 1960s, the civil rights movement became an inspirational political movement to expand voting rights in the United States. This movement seeks to dismantle discriminatory practices such as literacy tests and poll taxes that prevented many African Americans from voting. The Civil Rights of 1964 and, more importantly, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 prevented that anyone could be discriminated based on their race and ethnicity from voting. This was a huge leap forward into the voting rights movement. At the same time, all around the world, many nations were fighting for the right to equal and fair voting. Recent history and modern challenges. As we approach the 21st century, voting rights continue to evolve. This is when modern technology introduced electronic voting, bringing more opportunity to reach more people to vote, but at the same time also bringing challenges, especially when it came to election security. I quote, "In the late 1880s, everything shifted when the Acme voting machine was invented. This machine aimed at securing an honest vote. It did so by providing a way for poll overseers to detect additional voter fraud. From there until now, other machines have been developed, causing both a light and a lot of controversy among voters in different elections around the world. As of now, in many countries, people keep fighting for the right to vote and to enhance the voting experience, such as marginalized groups and more people can have access to this fundamental human right. The future of voting. To be honest, this topic should have its own video, as it probably requires me to do way more research than I have done. But to give you an idea, technologies such as blockchain are being explored to make voting more secure and accessible to the masses. Meanwhile, there are also movements that seek to restore people who have been imprisoned to vote, as well as to keep making more accessible voting for people that might have suffered from disability. This is just my own opinion. Like I mentioned, I haven't do research on it, on this topic specifically as in depth, but I can't help but wonder if AI will also have a play on future of political elections. Well, that's it for the evolution of voting and elections throughout history. As we move forward, let's remember that voting is a right that a lot of people have fought hard and long to be able to have. In any case, thank you so much for sharing this chit chat with me. If you liked it, if you find it fun or informative, feel free to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And if you enjoy my videos, feel free to check out these other videos that I think you might find interesting. In any case, thank you so much and have a lovely day. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.